Windhorse is our innate ability to uplift ourselves and our environment by giving rise to a positive energy that is both relaxed and disciplined. Since 1981, Windhorse Community Services has integrated this understanding with modern conventional therapies, meditation, and contemplative traditions in the development of at-home, whole-person mental health recovery. Windhorse Journal is dedicated to the mission of communicating decades of clinical and personal experience to professionals, educators, students, and anyone seeking recovery options. Please join the dialogue.
Welcome to Windhorse Journal Entry 85, Basic Attendance, Relationships that Invite Health, Team Counselors. This discussion provides an engaging look into the role of a team counselor on a Windhorse team. Windhorse clinicians with a wide array of knowledge and experience invite us into their hearts and minds, offering their insights on mutual recovery, unconditional acceptance, client stories, poetry, and so much more. We hope you enjoy.
Welcome to this podcast of the Windhorse Journal. I'm your host, Chuck Knapp, and this conversation is the fourth in our series on the clinical practice of basic attendance. Today, we'll be discussing the role of the team counselor, and I'm so pleased to be joined today by this group of Windhorse clinicians, all of whom have logged many miles in that role. Let me start with just a quick introduction of you all. Eriker Balderson, Windhorse community member for many years. You've been in the role of housemate, also team counselor, and now you're working on a number of teams as an assistant team leader. Sky Dowell, you've been at Windhorse for around 4 years now. You had a long stint as a housemate, and now you're working in the role as team counselor. Rebecca Diaz, you have been at Windhorse also for about 3 or 4 years, and you have been a team counselor and team leader now. And Dave Dunlap, many years. You've been a housemate, team counselor, as well as team leader, and you're now in the process of training as an intensive psychotherapist. We have a real wide, nice range of experience, and as I mentioned, an awful lot of experience as team counselors in many teams. So you've got a lot of experience to draw on here as we go forth and talk about what we're going to get into later. For starters, Sky, if you would please share with us a quick overview of the Windhorse approach. So we give ourselves a little bit of perspective and vocabulary to start with.
The Windhorse approach is health-based, meaning that we understand all people to be fundamentally sane and inclined to return to health and balance when the right conditions are present. In this view, confusion or extreme mental states, or some use the term mental illness, are temporary obstacles more like clouds that may obscure the brilliance of the sun. But just as the sun is never diminished by clouds, likewise, our sanity is not diminished by confusion. So it's always there as our deepest ally. We know that this can really sound like wishful thinking, but it's actually our experience, both personally as well as with our clients and families. At its most basic level, the Windhorse approach is characterized by creating individually tailored, home-based, whole-person recovery environments, which invite that person's sanity, health, and balance. Whole person means that we consider and include all aspects of a person's life in the therapeutic process. Our environments are grounded in their physical and domestic world. We cultivate open and healthy relationships. And of course, we work to help our clients clarify and understand their minds and emotions. The primary way that we develop this environment is through relationship. We'll often refer to Windhorse as relational medicine, as we know that when a person is experiencing mental confusion or distress, it's almost always helpful to be in the midst of people with healthy lifestyles and relatively stable minds. We actually experience health to be surprisingly contagious. So we create teams specific to each client's personality and interests in order to jumpstart their connection with ordinary, wholesome life activity. Things such as keeping their home in good order, developing healthy habits of eating, sleeping, and exercise, engaging in their interests, and meeting people outside of the team, which will often involve the greater Windhorse community, school, and work. Another part of the power of our environments is that we bring together teams with a number of complementary roles involved, including the team counselor, who spend the most time with the client in the midst of ordinary life activity. The client is also fully included as a team member, likewise families when possible, and together we create a system of relationships that's resilient and which can flexibly adapt as the recovery path evolves. The team and the environment that everyone creates is clearly a more powerful and intelligent therapeutic system than the sum of its parts.
Thank you, Skye, for sharing that overview. I just want to note also that, as you just said, that a team counselor spends the most time with the client in the midst of ordinary everyday life. That is as part of the team that doesn't live with the client. The housemate obviously spends the most time with people, but other than the housemate, this role is the one that you're really engaged more in the world and do longer periods of time than the other people. So Dave, would you please tell us about just kind of the basic activity of a team counselor? What does the role entail?
Sure. I think from kind of an objective lens, like, like logistically, typically you're showing up for 2-3 hour shifts a week with a client. That can be in their home, in the environment. Sometimes it's showing up somewhere, making a plan. Sometimes it's planning ahead of time and showing up. But 3 hour shifts, that gives enough time to kind of get into the rhythm of relationship with one another. Like an hour isn't always a good enough time to go shopping and make a lunch. But if you have 3 hours, you can do that. You can go shopping, buy stuff, make lunch, make dinner, have a conversation, and have a little downtime, and engage in some activity. Also meeting in the team meeting once a week to allow exploration and supervision and get support in the work that we're doing.
Okay, that's great. To begin bringing this to life, let's start with a story. And Dave, you have something you'd like to share with us that gets to in your experience, the heart of your work as a team counselor.
Yeah, thanks, Chuck. Just thinking about the long arc of experience with a client I've had and how all the nuances of the work that we do have played out throughout the experience. And gosh, I think I'm not even sure how many years ago now it was, probably 4 or more years when I first met this individual. I think oftentimes when clients come to Windhorse, not all the time, but oftentimes they come to us kind of in a significant state of dysregulation, confusion. And so entry points, in my experience, have been sensitive. And I remember meeting this client outside of a local pizza shop. He was with the team leader, and it was spring. And so I had my sunglasses on, and it was still the weather where I wear my fedora. And almost immediately, like this client shied away from me, really backed off and started saying something about like, no manly men or something like that. And realizing like, even though I'm approaching with all this intention of really, kind of being open and receptive to this person, my appearance was somewhat jarring. And so, removing my glasses, removing my fedora, putting it off on the side and just kind of sitting down for a little bit and watching, this individual relax, just a big indicator right off the bat of like the impact that I could have with a person, without even thinking about it. It kind of settled in, and we had our first shift maybe the day after that introduction. And from the beginning, it was a lot of spending time, just kind of off, just kind of like tangential, just a little bit behind, a little bit aside as we walked around the neighborhoods in Boulder. I think the security of having me there, I could notice that, but not really wanting me to be too present. So I like not a lot of room for me initially to talk, to ask questions, but definitely felt like I was wanted in the space. And so we would walk around, or we would go for drives. We'd drive around Boulder sometimes for what seemed like an excessive amount of time, but just kind of sharing space together at first, and little experiences of them kind of requesting, oh, can we go here? Or can you slow down? Or can we stop here and take this area in? And so just in my experience, it was a lot of getting comfortable with me as an individual. Is Dave a safe person? Is Dave going to let me be how I need to be right now? And so for me, it was a lot of just absorbing, a lot of taking it in, and maybe dabbling in questions here and there, but not getting too stuck on getting any answers. And yeah, with that patient kind of approach and with that, acknowledgement of like their safety was, to me, seems so paramount, rather than me like imposing some expectation or imposing some kind of outcome for any specific time. The outcome was really like creating safe space for one another. Pretty soon, we started, I started hearing a little bit more from the client about like, what was on their mind or what they were curious about. And they'd start bouncing questions off of me. There's more space open up for me to ask questions, to be a little more curious about what was going on for them. And yeah, just noticing more laughter between us, like a buddy kind of experience started to open up. There was more space for me to offer maybe my thoughts or my ideas about what would be fun or interesting to do, and watching the client enjoy changing things up a little bit and even commenting on that. I'm so glad you brought this up. I'm so glad we went to the park today. And recognizing that that developing relationship and that developing appreciation for one another as they opened up more and allowed more space for me to kind of come into their world. Again, with the trajectories we have, there's going to be confusion. There's going to be times that feel, I would say, maybe even like a step back, although it's not, it just feels that way. At least that's the way I see it. But there was a time with this client where they did get, again, pretty kind of dysregulated. The confusion really kind of ramped up a bit, probably call it like a hypomanic state, a lot of energy, but not a lot of focus. And in that, they were pretty independent with their medications because they had been pretty consistent with them for years at this point, but they decided to take all their medications all at once and immediately contacted the authorities as well. So that, this was all happening outside of the team, but we were notified pretty quickly. But the police were able to get this person from their apartment and get them to the hospital. And so the team leader had gone over there and kind of settled things in, and I got a call from the guy, had a shift coming up and explain the situation. And so for the next like 2 or 3 days, just spending all of my shifts and whatever, if I had some free time, swinging by the hospital and spending time with them. And they were unconscious at the time. It was a pretty significant amount of medication that was taken. And I think that, yeah, they just kind of gone into this unconscious state. And so just watching them in bed and, kind of the tubes and the sensors all hooked up and watching their breathing and just feeling that, I don't know, feeling this really sad but hopeful about the whole experience, and noticing like each day, it's nice to have, I think, in these spaces, like the little bit of contact I would have with the nursing staff, because they could share with me the details they're aware of, like the vitals are improving, breathing's improving, like things are looking better. And so that would help put me at ease as I was sitting with the client. I remember, I think the last day before they woke up, the nursing staff was like, things are looking really good. They're probably going to wake up, before tomorrow morning. But I knew I was the last person that was going to be in there in the hospital with them before tomorrow morning. And I had this moment of feeling like, what would it be like to wake up in the hospital all alone after, I imagine the last thing they consciously remember was a really distressing situation. And I knew I couldn't sit there all night long, but I was trying to figure out something to do that might help be like just some awareness of soothing kind of point of contact. And so I went down to the gift shop and bought this little stuffed horse and left it by the client, like that kind of rested in their arm. I don't know if they even knew that I was the one that did that. So they never specifically said anything to me about it. Throughout the next coming months and years, I would see that horse like either on their bed or on their couch. And sometimes when they were feeling really worked up and we were in their apartment together, they'd have the horse and be holding it. And so it represented something. And I kept that to myself. Like I didn't feel like the need to necessarily say, well, hey, that's the horse I bought you. But it was nice to know that had some impact, like what I was looking for, just to have some soothing point of contact.
While you were talking, Dave, I was just appreciating the vulnerability of being with somebody during a time in their life where they need support, and like the intimacy that kind of comes with that, and just how over time that can form a pretty strong bond.
Yeah, Dave, I was thinking about how this is such a good example of, the subtlety of this work, and just like doing all of these little things that are sometimes, most of the time, unnoticed, but are slowly altering the environment for the client, slowly altering their emotional space, and that can look like what you were talking about with providing this soothing animal for the client. But it happens slowly, as like maybe the house gets cleaner, the dishes are getting done on time, there's a schedule that gets implemented, and these pieces that create safety and consistency, that the changes are subtle.
I mean, this horse is sort of, in some kind of sense, the highlight of the story. And sort of how you, in the middle of a tremendous sort of a crisis, for something very kind. And to do that sort of in the middle of all of that, and be open to that coming to you, that idea. And then the horse is there, at the client's house, and has a role. I just appreciate this sort of a connection between sort of like a difficult situation, but having this space for this detail in the middle of it.
Yeah, that was really touching. Part of what I was curious about as you were telling the story and the evolution of your relationship, Dave, is how interactive sanity is in a certain way. Because I guess that as this was going on, you were starting to relax too. You were probably struggling a little bit in the beginning to relax yourself. And I know maybe I'm projecting that on you, but I know for myself, usually when I'm meeting somebody in those situations, I'm a little tight, and trying to figure out what's going on here. Was there an evolution of your own kind of relaxation as your interaction and feelings developed for each other?
Yeah, absolutely. I think I try to step into these situations with as much relaxation as I can muster. But there is uncertainty, and uncertainty, I think, for me, breeds a little bit of apprehension and caution in getting to know somebody who is in a kind of confused state. Like, I remember very early on, like, their behaviors were risky. Sometimes they would act out certain kind of, I guess, what internal experiences they were having, but they would act them out somatically, and they'd be like lunging at things or walking kind of precariously close to the road. And so there's this part of me is like, how do I learn to trust that this person is going to be safe when I'm with them, for themselves? I didn't have a lot of concern for my own safety, but just like, can I hold a container for this individual? For me to learn to trust that these things weren't going to go that next step took a little while. And so, yeah, there was definitely a relaxation of myself, and also that apprehension of, will I ever be accepted? Will I be safe? And one of the things that I forget, I think it's a kind of combination of Sky and Rebecca, some things that you said, of in those moments, I was trying to think about, like, what has this person's experience been thus far with strangers? Like, I can't imagine they feel very well accepted by people who don't understand who they are. And I imagine oftentimes feel like they're expected to change their experience, which is probably incredibly difficult when you're in such a confused state. But like, how much they've been asked to be anything else but what they want to be. And so trying to trust and allow them to be themselves for a while, and show that I can hold space for that, but also learning in myself to hold space for that so I can relax, Chuck, like what you're saying. All of that was present at the beginning.
there's something in what you're saying, Dave, about proximity, maybe, the client being witnessed or categorized in a certain way in society, and maybe other people don't get close because of that. And then you finding the space or just kind of holding the space long enough for the relationship to develop, which is kind of what is there beyond whatever's happening outwardly, whatever that looks like, the behaviors or however society is viewing this person. And that when you get so close, when you can relax into the relationship, that kind of dissolves a little bit, or it's so welcomed that it's not a problem. It's fundamentally okay. There's something in that.
It makes me think of unconditional love or presence. And I mean, even though it might take some time, for me before like feelings of care for a client deepen into sort of like an unconditional love, or I personally consider it a gift to be able to offer that presence where a client can just be exactly where they're at without having to change or fit to be more acceptable in whatever way they might perceive that people want that. Yeah, it feels like a gift to be able to provide that.
As you say, the gift piece, Sky, I'm remembering times where I felt gifted as well in providing that, like being out in certain public spaces and part of me really wanting them to show up differently, the way they're presenting as we're walking down Pearl Street and what they're saying to the people we're passing by. And part of me is like, oh, how do I accept that I'm here with this person doing this? I'm learning to think about my own, like what's getting in my own way of just being okay with how things are. And then recognizing sometimes in my experience of them is they had been unapologetically courageous, just out there in the world and showing up how they want to. And I was like recognizing all the times in my life that I haven't done that, and like learning through witnessing this and watching how people responded. Like usually people responded a lot more openly and receptively than I anticipated they would. And so to see that and say, oh, I can show up a little bit more courageously in myself. I don't have to shy away so much, and finding my own kind of appreciation of just, being unapologetically me, maybe to a different degree, but still recognizing that kind of mutual path with them. Like, oh, I get to learn a little bit of something about being courageous. So.
Yeah, I think there's some kind of a trust that there's space in the middle of any situation. And I've been with clients also out in restaurants where there was just like a client is constantly honking very loudly to himself, just sitting in a booth in a restaurant, or standing up and walking around. So some kind of a trust, just trusting also other people, just trusting something humane, that there's actually something sort of beautiful happening in some kind of way. Just how that person is expressing themselves. And I also think about sort of what we do as team counselors, we call it basic attending. And when I'm with someone in that type of situation, I mean, one is constantly opening to some kind of a surprise and constantly letting go of something in oneself, some kind of a judgment or this has to be this way, or this has to be that way. But then at the same time, one is also attending, one is also aware. And sometimes one has to direct the situation or make decisions. I was once with his clients in his restaurant, and I went many times with them. At some point, I just had to sort of decide that it was good just to step out and take a walk.
It's really interesting listening to you all talk about the process of entering into a relationship with someone in this in this zone, someone who comes to us for some kind of health recovery, some kind of change to move their life into a place that maybe is more where they want it to be, where they'll feel more happy and less confused. And it takes a huge amount of courage to do that, actually. And Dave, you were talking about kind of actually relaxation and the courage it takes you to open up to them as well. The relationship is really happening. And I think there's a bunch of different ways that teams work together, and the glue happens that helps someone to sustain the kind of tumult sometimes and intensity of a recovery process. But y'all are talking about this in a really, I think, interesting way. And Sky, what you brought up about the feelings of love, people oftentimes in therapeutic conversations don't name that so much, but it's there. And there's something about the equality of us as people. The client isn't less than us. We're not better than them. We're all people, and we do different things. But you all are kind of touching on this. Does anybody have another story or thing they'd like to riff into around this?
Yeah, something that I was thinking about as you were talking was also these moments when the client opens up, or when there's a kind of a break in their confusion, and they can see me. And I had this experience pretty early on when I started with Windhorse, with a client who was pretty young, like maybe like late 20s, early 30s, and just having kind of their first psychotic break, and hearing voices, and the voices were violent and attacking. And a lot of the time I spent with this client was, just kind of in dialogue with him as he was in dialogue with his voices. And there was at some point, I'm not sure what it was, I just had this thought that we needed to move, we talk a little bit at Windhorse about body-mind synchronization, and it was very clear he was dysregulated and experiencing a lot of mental distress. So we went on a hike, and I was like moving my body like as fast as I could up the mountain. And I don't usually move fast. I do everything slow, but this, was a pretty athletic young male. And the whole time up the mountain, he was, just complete in dialogue the whole time. And we got to the top, and there was a pretty big expansive view. And we sat down at the top of the mountain, and he was just like looking around. He stopped, everything stopped, the voices stopped. There was like such stillness. And he was like, wow, this is a beautiful view. And then he turned around and looked at me and said, how are you? And it was like the first time in several weeks that he'd even noticed maybe that I was there, just being so caught in the confusion. And it was just I don't know, it was a really special moment to have with him up there. It was like something, in his body, like his body had moved fast enough to catch up with his mind, and then something could take a break.
What you're saying, Rebecca, reminds me of experiences I've had with a few clients as well, where when there's a break in the confusion, and it seems like there's a certain relief of having somebody else nearby to say, hey, how are you? And there's a certain appreciation of, oh, I get to get in contact with somebody else. Sometimes that means sitting quietly again, like alongside or somebody for a while as they go through their process, but knowing that like in those little moments of when there's clarity or whatever it might be, that they have somebody to touch in with, rather than being alone in that space. And I find that oftentimes leads to some really fun conversations. Goofiness, I think, arises in some of my experiences there. It's like, oh, let's laugh together.
Yeah, I think we started to pick up rocks and throw them at a tree. Like it was very, playful.
Yeah, that moment where he asked how you were makes me think of like the difference between a therapist and a team counselor or a basic attender. Is it is more like a therapeutic friendship where they're not there to, you know, meet your needs or support you, but at the same time there can be this back and forth friendship aspect where, in my experience, I definitely share a lot more about my personal world and thoughts and feelings than I would in a therapist role, for sure.
I think this is sort of an interesting topic. This love was brought up. I mean, I think it's sort of like sharing oneself and one's own humanity just with someone else, and sharing, be with. I'm just myself as who I am, having lived my whole life, but also not to demand something. You know, sort of not have some kind of idea how someone should be, or what recovery is, or what health is, and then that these moments of clarity or moments of openness, these things just happen by themselves. I mean, it happens all the time being with someone, you know, very small little things. You know, I have a client that talks to himself all the time. He's really caught up in these voices. And then we take a walk, and then just suddenly we notice something. And I used to point out things, beautiful clouds, or, you know, this is kind of nice to see that child play there on the tricycle. But now that client is starting to point things out to me. So it sort of sometimes goes the other way around, you know, that I might be caught up in my thoughts, in my daydreams as we walk. And then that client or that person or that friend, I don't know what to call them, will just point out something beautiful.
Erica, you bring up one of the reasons that I love this work so much is that we get to be in so many different environments. You know, like if inside is too much, we can go outside. If outside is too much, we can go off into the woods, you know, or, you know, have dinner. Like the environment really does impact the relationship and the ability to connect. And I feel like that is such a gift.
Yeah, it's sort of a thousandfold. I mean, there's just no limit to it, to what one could experience every moment being with someone. And just like when I'm in my own life with myself, what makes me sane in my life? You know, what do I appreciate about my life? Or it could be some very simple experiences or something very simple. So it's really not about changing someone or changing myself, but some kind of a sense of being just in life and being open. And then that there's something good about that.
Erica, what you were just saying about learning as we go along in relationship, and it dawned on me a long time ago that so many of my clients are so much more intelligent and sensitive than I am, but they're not necessarily operating efficiently in the world. That something's kind of out of, you know, they're out of sync with how they are in the world, and they're not swimming in consensus reality, which may sound weird, but R.D. Laing, the famous psychiatrist R.D. Laing, he had said once that basically people that get absorbed in extreme states, they're very similar to people in mystical states of mind. It's just that the mystics know how to swim, and the folks in extreme states often drown. So I think a big part of our work is to help people learn to be who they are. Us accepting them for who they are has certainly been a theme all through this, and it's certainly accurate in my experience of doing this work. And then how to be in the world and live in the world so that they're not constantly being kind of hit with the various rejections and stigmas and othering that goes on for people who get into extreme states. And part of, I think, the efficacy of what we do, Rebecca, you were just talking about, which is working in different environments. So we go, there's the house environment, there's going out for coffee or whatever. There's all kinds of different ways that we move through the world, and we do this with our client in basic attendance. And in those environments, we, through relationship and our awareness, interactive awareness, we both create some way that people learn to attune to how to be in the world more together. And we learn together at the same time. I'm curious, I just said a lot there, but if any of you have any reactions to what I'm saying here.
I guess I could say that working as a team counselor has definitely made me more aware of how different environments make me feel. I worked with a client in the past that liked to go to places where a lot of college students like to hang out, sort of like party environments. And I noticed it, there was a certain like energy, there was a certain kind of young party energy. And yeah, I mean, it definitely made me reflect more like on the purpose of the shift and basic attendance, and whether or not it was something that was supportive for the client. And, it led to a discussion between me and the team and the client about not only like what's supportive to the client, but what's supportive to me. Like if I feel uncomfortable in a situation or in an environment, how does that impact the client, and does it?
What did you figure out about the college scenes?
I think for me in the end, because in those environments, for me, it created a kind of internal tension, because I know that one of our goals at Windhorse is to be present and aware. And the party atmosphere sort of conflicted with the kind of presence that I was trying to offer on the shift. So in the end, I actually ended up asking the client if we could not have shifts in that environment anymore. So it kind of led to this whole situation where I was required to set a boundary. There could have been some like conflict between me and the client there, but I think in the end it led to us being closer in a sense, because I was speaking to my needs and being transparent.
How about as you get to know a person over time and you think about jump-starting their kind of interests in life? And so oftentimes, a person who comes to us is, they may have been in school or had disciplines and activities that they really had connection to in an earlier part of their life, and that may have been interrupted. And oftentimes, when we put a team together, we'll be thinking about, say, if the person coming to us, the client, has artistic interests or musical interests. We try to tailor the teams in such a way that there would be people like team counselors, for instance, who may have artistic experience, and from there's this, I think, oftentimes jump-starting quality that can happen, along with what you were talking about earlier, Eric, where about we bring all of who we are to these situations and into our relationship. When you're with somebody 2 or 3 hours at a time, you don't have the same kinds of boundary that you do in an in-office therapy situation. You have to mix it up more, precisely with care, but you have to mix your own life in more to the basic attendance experience. And so creating environments that help jumpstart a person's health and interests and connections to themselves and to the environment. I'm just curious how that sounds to you, if that makes sense in your experience.
What comes to me is there's some kind of a mutual attraction that can happen that I find very important in his work. That I might get interested also in something that the client is interested in.
Yes.
And that happens so always. I mean, there's always something about someone else that I could be interested in, or am interested in, or could develop interest in.
Mm-hmm.
It could be something that I'm already interested in. Could be we watch something together. Could be on philosophy or religion or music or science, or there could be something that the client knows that I might want to know more about. Well, I have a client that's really interested in basketball. And I've never been much interested in sports. And I was sitting there many times watching basketball, sort of not that interested. And I started to develop interest in it. And I find basketball now very, very interesting and enjoyable to watch. So it could be anything. It could also just be interest in sort of how someone nods their head, or what they find funny, or how they appreciate their meal. But just basically speaking, that sort of a sense of that I'm being attracted to something in someone else, and then maybe I can be fearless of having them being attracted in something in me, and let them display themselves.
I think I have an example of this. I was, asked to be on a team because I like to write. And this client also had expressed some interest and passion for writing. And so we met and, seemed to have a connection. And so I joined the team, and the connection over writing was not happening, did not happen. So yeah, it really took a long time, or just doing like pretty mundane things before this client invited me to play a video game. It was a computer game. And I don't play video games, but it was the way that we did this thing together, the way that she, would walk me through, like teach me the game. And then at some point we were able to play together as equals, where we had to negotiate the story and the movements and the actions, and, work together to complete each game. And that's where our relationship started to happen. And in that experience, I think I kind of recognized also that what you're saying, Erica, of just being curious and not grabbing on to things, but just like allowing myself to be curious and open. And then that happens in return, because, while we're playing this game, she started to ask me questions about school or about my life or what I had for dinner. I think that's a really sweet example of what you're talking about.
Yeah, I mean, I love that you both mentioned allowing that space, the client to just explore their natural curiosity. Because I think for me, working as a team counselor has been a big learning experience in trusting a person's natural wisdom when it comes to their recovery and their own pace of that. It's just not something that you can control. And a lot of times it seems like it's easy to get caught up in wanting the client to be interested in certain subjects or show up in a certain way. Like the team may really think it would be really great if the client could start volunteering at a certain place. For me, this, like, the mutual recovery piece comes in when I'm able to take a step back and say, the client may know what they need more than I do. It's their recovery. And if they want to build a fun house out of cardboard boxes, I'm game. Like, let's do it.
There's so many really interesting things that I've learned about with my clients over the years. But part of what grabs me, I think, is people's passion for things. So, if I can relax enough and help a person relax into who they are, their passion starts to show up. And that kind of basic energy is so much of the bedrock of what drives recovery, like the ability to kind of find your energy, Windhorse energy, actually, that kind of life force and confident ability to connect to the world. Just that, I love that part of this kind of work. Mm-hmm. Let me ask a question here. I'm kind of thinking about, what do you all think is the most helpful thing you do as a team counselor?
I mean, I think people often don't recognize like how powerful the presence of somebody who is actively working on themselves and is emotionally regulated can be. And I think, like, when we take on the role of team counselor, that's kind of like what we're committing to do, is to be as best we can, because it is mutual recovery, but to be that presence in other people's lives. And so it's both like inspiring for me to continue to work on myself, and hopefully, I mean, I believe makes a positive impact on the client.
Would you say just a little bit more about mutual recovery, what that is?
I guess for me, it's just the way that working with a client both brings up issues for me that I can and will continue to work on. And at the same time, like, I'm being present for the client while they're working on their own issues.
Mm-hmm. That was nicely put. Anyone else have any more on that mutual recovery?
I mean, I think for me, it's just to share myself in my own humanity. And I mean, I'm on my path, and I have my struggles, and the boundary between mental health and illness is, it's not two opposite poles. So they're very interrelated. Mental illness or imbalance can be a reflection of the health, that wants to break through or is stifled. So there's a lot to share. There's a lot for me to be attracted to and learn and appreciate in someone else, and then I can also share myself in a way that's healthy, and so that's the mutual recovery in many ways.
Yeah, and Sky, I think you gave a pretty good example of that when you were talking about your client and setting the boundary of not going into the party spaces. And I think so much of, for me, the mutual recovery comes in the form of boundaries. When to set a hard boundary, when to set a loving boundary, when to have subtle boundaries, and modeling that in a way that we stay in relationship with each other rather than break apart, which can happen a lot.
It's sort of interesting. So we talked about attraction, and Rebecca's bringing in boundary. Mutual recovery could also be enrichment. The more I work for Windhorse as a team counselor is also just someone to tell someone else that they're good, or what I appreciate about them, actually tell them about it. And they could tell me what they appreciate about me, and it's very interesting. So mutual enrichment will also come in here, and of course also the mutual recovery of just holding the space and just sort of not reacting to anything.
Yeah, I think ditto to so many things that have been said. One of the things in addition for me is like removing the kind of authoritative role that oftentimes caregiving or therapy, being the therapist, can have. Like as a team counselor, it's so equal, and we learn from one another. And mutual recovery is about being open to one another for me. And so not seeing myself as the provider of all wisdom, the provider of all recovery, but like paying attention to like, oh my God, I can learn so many things. Like Chuck, you're talking about like waking up to passions, and Erica, like you're talking about like learning from clients. Like that's mutual recovery to me. It's like how are we in this space as equals? And what do I learn about myself and about the world through you, as I'm equally hoping that you're learning and discovering through me.
Mm-hmm. Of course, mutual recovery is to have humor together also. That is hugely important.
I think all of what you're describing, the sense of mutuality and creating an atmosphere of learning, that we're all there, we're curious and learning together, that interactive quality is so human, and inviting our kind of personal discovery of the best parts of ourselves forward. I think you're doing a really nice job of describing different aspects of that. All of what we've been discussing throughout this time, we often refer to as relational medicine, the basic attendance and forming relationships with people that come to us as a way of helping them move a recovery path, engage and move a recovery path along. And Rebecca, you've written a really lovely piece here on relational medicine. So if you would please read that for us, I think it would be really a nice way to wrap up.
This is a poem that I wrote inspired by my work as a team counselor with clients. The poem is called The Space in Between, or Some Notes on Relational Medicine. But as long as you remember what you have seen, then nothing is gone. Leslie Marmon Silko. The medicine is in us, my friend. You, born of natural wisdom, a misfit and a rebel to a fully functional society. I wonder what to say to you often, fumbling with the desire to wake you, taking in the grief for the obstacles growing inside you. Who will usher their arrival? Who will be there to receive them, walk beside you as they manifest? Breath by breath, this is a labor of sorts. You and I sit long in its qualities of confusion. You invite me to greet its way of making meaning. I hold this in regard, brokenhearted, then take it in as my own. Learn to love it like a potted plant, feed it the food of relationship. A shared bowl of French fries, winding drives through mountain peaks, whispers from unseen voices, the kind of gaze that reaches other worlds, clearing out old sardine cans, building a small beaver dam, 2 crows circling overhead. Could I say this to you? Share the imprint you're leaving? This is not a care I've known before. It is uniquely unfolding, revealing itself in the way you run low to the ground and sweep in fast, the way you fling wide open like windows and slam shut in the slightest gust, transparent, heavy, cool, steadied along the path even as a presence befuddles. You are iron will and tenderness. You are earth, hibiscus, and dogwood. You walk this world sensitive, feeling the subtleties of the wind as it breaks against our backs. We run like children, starting and stopping to tell a story or break open milkweed pods, spreading seeds all along this path. We launch a flight of ideas in the woods and then sit beside the creek searching for words that fit you, taking in deep sighs when one is found. Watching you wake to the awe of connection is a gift, my young friend. I value the seat beside your wildness. Take my shoulder while we're here. Memorize the bodies standing at your back as obstacles come and go. Remember this place where we held cold stones and contemplated their shape, where you willingly lent yourself to my path and I to yours, the two of us easing and growing from the space in between.
Thank you, Rebecca. Thank you all so much. It's been a real honor to be here today with you all.
Thank you for listening to Windhorse Journal Entry 85. Please visit our website at www.windhorsecommunityservices.com/journal to read a copy of Rebecca's poem and an upcoming article on the team counselor role. We hope you tune in next month for a continuation of this series on basic attendance, relationships that invite health. Our next episode will host a conversation with a group of long-term Windhorse clinicians and their experiences within the role of a team leader. The Windhorse Journal can be found on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts.
Windhorse Journal is a publication of Windhorse Community Services, supporting recovery from mental health challenges at home and in the community since 1981.